Well, we've been working in all of those schools to make sure we've got the desktop barriers and the tabletop barriers in place, and seeing what the capacity is going to be in those classrooms. And like you heard us talk about the other night, we've got some concerns with some classrooms that may have more students than what the capacity is rated for. So we're looking at alternatives for those. I think the term we've been using is overflow rooms. But it would be either another classroom or cafeteria or some other space where we could put additional students that they could be watching online. That pretty much the teacher would just have a camera. It wouldn't be a separate lesson. Just have a camera on the teacher, and then they would be watching it online. And we would rotate those students in those classes. We had to do that so the same ones aren't in the extra space every day. And also making sure that they've got the opportunity that they can actually interact with the teacher, if not during class and sometime during the day, to ask questions or things like that.
So when will you guys know how many students are going to be in person 5 days a week?
Well, I would think that, we'd get through that Monday, Tuesday, we should be able to run those numbers and have an accurate count.
When will you know if you have enough teachers to cover the in-school students?
Well, we're kind of monitoring. I say we. Ms. Smith is mainly the one doing it, monitoring those requests. I don't know that there have actually been a lot of them. And then she's working with Mr. Jenkins to see if we need to make any adjustments. But if it happens like it did in the elementary school, it really didn't require much of a change at all. There wasn't any big numbers switching either way. It's kind of a wash.
Okay. Now, once the middle and high schoolers go back, is it going to be different? Will the students change classes like they used to do before COVID, or will the teachers be the one changing classes?
No, the students will change classes. And so one of the things, like I was at Georgetown High yesterday, and we were looking at this. We're looking at all the middle and high schools for this, is how the traffic flow is going to work. At some schools where you've got really wide hallways like Georgetown High, you can kind of separate those pathways out so that they can maintain distance and have two-way traffic. But then you take one like Waccamaw High, it's got narrower hallways and a large number of students. So they're going to have a one-way foot traffic pattern. But that's part of the back to business thing that MUSC has done, is that they've gone and looked at places like in Waccamaw High, where they did one of their initial surveys, and identified places where it needs to be one-way traffic, where we could use some additional signage. It was really good having a fresh set of eyes come in and look at some of these things. We've kind of seen it so much that it's hard to see where the difference is. But they made a few good points that we'll implement, and they also had a lot of good things to say for what the schools are doing already.
And what about lunchtime? Will students go in the lunchroom, or is lunch brought to the classroom?
It'll be a mix depending on the school. Every school is going to have their own plan because it depends on the numbers involved. I mean, you got some very small schools that can handle it. You got some of the larger ones that are going to have to look at different options. And again, I'll talk about Georgetown High because I was talking to Mr. Stone yesterday about it. So they know what their capacity is in the cafeteria. They also know that they have a number of kids that just don't eat, so they can use the auditorium space for some of those. And then as the weather gets better, they can also use outside. But certainly some schools will be using classrooms as well.
A recess, going outside, playing, is that happening or not?
It is, and what we got to be careful of, like with the elementary schools, is that we're so careful to cohort them, keeping them in their classes and separated from others and all that, is that we've had to do a little more supervision at recess to try to keep those classes apart, and you've got more than one class on the playground at a time, so that we don't want them intermingling out there and taking away all the benefit of cohorting for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm. Now, when they go outside, do they have to wear a mask?
Yes.
Okay, even outside. And they have to wear a mask at their desk or not when they're sitting down?
They do have to wear them, and that's an important point to bring up, is that, and we've discussed this with DHEC and the State Department, is that even if you're behind plexiglass, you have to wear the mask. That's the only way that DHEC will approve the 3 feet of spacing is that there has to be plexiglass that meets their specifications, and there has to be mask wearing going on.
Now, what about the concern we've heard from some people that, especially the kids that are in the back of the class, the plexiglass makes it hard to hear, maybe sun glare or light glare makes it hard to see. What's being done about that?
Well, so what we've told our teachers is if that's an issue with those students, we need to move them around, either just reseat them in the classroom, or it may be you need to rotate the students to different seats from time to time. We realize that they're inconvenient. It's not optimum for learning, but it's also the rules they've given us to get that many kids into the classroom and get them back face to face. So I think what people have to weigh is that the value of having them back in the classroom versus having them in the virtual environment. So, of course, obviously virtual is a choice for those where it works, but for a lot of those parents where it doesn't work as well and want them back in the classroom, that's one of the trade-offs that has to take place in order to get them in there. Mm-hmm. But we realize it's not a perfect solution, so we're looking for these variations, like just moving kids around the classroom, that sort of thing, that will make it work as best we can.
Now, of course, you were the head of the state's Accelerate committee that study this a lot, especially in 2020. Being a part of that committee, how safe do you feel our schools are going to be once students are back 5 days a week?
Well, I think the numbers show that Georgetown County, again, was the lowest transmission rate in the state, incident rate in the state this week. We were under 200, and 183.5 was the number that came out yesterday. So we were actually the only county in the state that was in medium in that category. Our percent positive rate dropped down to 6.7%. So those numbers seem to be coming down. Obviously, we're going to watch and monitor closely to see if there's any spikes. We really have, when we have an issue, it's not so much with people testing positive as it is with quarantines. And I think the studies that you've seen with CDC and these other sources that have been cited a lot, it's kind of been our experience, too, that a lot of the activities that are taking place away from school that lead to having to quarantine good-sized numbers of people. And so, but we'll definitely be watching that, because obviously just the fact that we're bringing more people back in at one time raises the possibility that we could have a situation. So we'll keep a close eye on that.
And just to explain that real quick, because there's some people that they'll look at the district's website and the dashboard and see, one school has 28 students that are quarantined, and in their head, sometimes it pops that that's 28 positive students tested positive for COVID, but that's not the case, right?
No. So what our dashboard has on it, we've got it into 4 columns. We have positive students, positive staff on the left-hand side, and then on the right side we have quarantine students and quarantine staff. And so if you look at the numbers today, February 19th, we have 17 positive students and 10 positive staff. Now, the quarantine numbers are still a good bit higher. It's 99 quarantine students, 37 quarantine staff. But then if you go and look at the particular schools involved, especially with those quarantine numbers, you can see where some large ones have taken place. And like I say, some of those are outside community activities. One thing we've noticed where we've had to quarantine students, too, is if somebody comes to school positive, say in a special education class or a kindergarten class where mask use may not be as prevalent or even possible, then that could lead to a higher number of quarantined students. And then, but the positive numbers have really come down. Our quarantine numbers have dropped a good bit too. There was a community event a couple of weeks ago that ran those numbers up with quarantined students, but that number now is starting to drop back down as those time periods end.